Hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. And today's topic we're going to look at is the U.S. budget. Now, why is this important? First of all, 25 or nearly 25% of our GDP is U.S. government expenditures. So if you have 100,000, 25,000 goes into the US budget. In other words, it is absolutely huge. And now, why else are we going over it? This was something interesting. When I went to law school, went to MBA school, received my bachelor's degree in political science and a master's in taxation, neither one time did any professor in all these courses ever discuss probably the next most important document behind the Constitution, which is the United States budget. We never looked at it. Okay, even worse. For nearly 40 years of practicing law, going to CLE, mandatory CLE courses for 40 years, not one class, not one, discussed the US budget. 25% of everything that you own that you work in is the US budget. And then finally at the Pod TV network, we decided finally getting the former Comptroller General of the United States, David M. Walker, on board to discuss probably one of the most important documents, and we are sending it out to everybody because you can read it. It's on the internet. It's 188 pages, and the devil's in the details. A lot of details aren't there, but we're going to bring in a person who can enlighten us on this, and this is the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. David, welcome to your show.
Good to be with
tell
you.
Tell us what's going on.
Well, first, every year, the president is supposed to submit a budget by the first Monday in February. And this year, it was not submitted until over a month late. As you know, we didn't even have funding for fiscal 2024, which started in October of 2023, until the last week or so, because we were operating under continuing resolutions. But now the president has submitted his proposed budget, which is for fiscal 2025, which would start in October of this calendar year and go through September 30, 2025. And he also does, as part of that, submit projections for the next 10 years. So you can get a sense as to where does he want to go based upon his policies. So let me just make a few upfront observations about the budget. First, he's proposing significant tax increases and significant spending increases. So it's a tax and spend budget, largely. When you look at it, we have continuing rising levels of debt to GDP for a number of years into the future. There is no proposal to basically try to deal with our structural deficits, the large and growing imbalance between revenues and expenditures. If you look at the proposed budget just for 2025, he's proposing about $1 trillion in tax increases as compared to 2023. And at the same point in time, about $1.1 trillion in higher spending as compared to 2023, which means that the deficit is up about $100 billion for 2023, projected at roughly $8 trillion. Tax increases, if you look at percentage of GDP, which is another way to look at it, 16.5% was the level of federal taxation in 2023. He's proposing 18.7 in 2025, rising to 20.3 at the end of the 10-year term of 2034, which is right at about the maximum level of taxation the country's ever had in history. I think the maximum level was 20.4 in the year 2000, which was a year that we had a surplus and paid down debt. A lot of that was because of the dot-com boom, which became the dot-com bust. Outlays for 2025, 24.8%, up from 22.7% of GDP in 2023. But a few comments about the longer term projection. During the 10-year period of time, the president doesn't project any recession. So we're going to have no recessions over 10 years, maybe for the first time ever. I don't know. Secondly, modest growth with lower interest cost, significantly lower over time as far as rates, interest rates, I should say, rather than costs. Costs will go up, but rates they're projecting are going to come down pretty significantly. They assume that all the tax cuts associated with the Trump administration, which is supposed to expire at the end of 2025, will in fact expire. That's not a realistic assumption. They assume that all of the spending constraints associated with the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023 will continue past their scheduled expiration date. Again, not a realistic assumption. There's no provision at all for emergency spending, whether it's domestic with regard to, emergencies, whether it be natural disasters or whatever they might be, or whether they be international related to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, etc. And so despite all of this, we still have deficits of at least $1.5 trillion as far as the eye can see, mounting debt to GDP burdens, which everybody in Washington has said, even OMB, which put this together for the president, and the Congressional Budget Office and GAO and the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department have all said that we're on an unsustainable path. And yet there's nothing in this budget that tries to address that. Nothing. Three things are going to happen for us to be able to regain fiscal sanity and sustainability. We're going to have to get a president who has the courage to tell the truth, make tough choices, to put our finances in order. We don't have one now, and frankly, we haven't had one since Bill Clinton. Secondly, we're going to need a statutory fiscal sustainability commission that engages the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, solicits their input, and makes a package of recommendations where everything's on the table, but not everything is equal, that will get a guaranteed up or down vote in Congress, focused on reducing, not increasing, not stabilizing, reducing our debt to GDP over the next 10 years to a reasonable and sustainable level. And thirdly, we've got to have a constitutional amendment that limits the growth of the government and how much debt as a percentage of the economy we can take on. One Congress can't bind the next one. Statutory approaches don't work. They don't stand the test of time. Failure to address this has serious adverse economic security, national security, international standing, and domestic tranquility consequences over time. So those are my overview comments. I will note a few selective more points, okay, on a more targeted basis, that the defense budget, and don't get me wrong, there's plenty of opportunity to cut spending in defense without compromising our national security. But I will note that between 2025, which is the president's proposal, and 2023, the defense budget is supposed to be cut in real terms by about 3% in real terms. And ironically, the Transportation Department and the Corps of Engineers, which are, having to deal with a lot of our infrastructure problems, including the recent bridge collapse in Baltimore, they're proposing to be cut significantly between 2023 and 2025. And so those are just a few observations, but Nick, I know you've got a lot more, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, I do. And the thing is, I guess I have my own little quirks about me when it comes to being more parsimonious, and of course, reading the famous book, The Millionaire Next Door, how cheap rich people are, and rich people are rich because they're cheap or parsimonious. How do you want to look at it? Frugal, right? And the thing is, yeah, frugal. Whatever you say. And the thing is, when you look at the U.S. government and the budget and the debt, it would be different if the debt was if we were financially stable, and we're not. And I'm looking for the balanced budget that Bill Clinton did, and before him, Richard Nixon did. And before that, what's a balanced budget? If Biden had submitted a balanced budget hey, he's got my vote. He didn't submit a ballot budget. I'm looking to go somewhere else. But let's take a look at some of the things that just transpired recently, which just get my Irish up. 1.2 million to a Pride Center in New York City. Now, I don't have anything against the Pride Center in New York City. They can open it if they want. I do have something against U.S. government money being used for a Pride Center in New York City, especially when the U.S. government is broke and somebody in Des Moines, Iowa may not want to pay for this Pride Center. And this is part of our earmark problem that needs to be eliminated. Here's another one that came out. How about $3 billion to Palo Alto History Museum? David, oh, do you want to spend $3 billion? Look, if you want to spend $3 billion in Palo Alto, where some of the wealthiest people in the world live, but why is the person in Kansas City, Kansas, spending $3 billion on a Palo Alto History Museum? Then we have 1.2 million to DACA. What is 1.2 million going to DACA all about? Now, here's another one. This is in Ohio. 1 million to a Zora House to study gender issues. I don't give a rat's rear about the gender issue studying, but I don't want my taxpayer dollars going that direction. It gets worse. 3 million to LGBTQIA centers. I still don't know what an I is, but I don't really care. I don't want 3 million of U.S. government money going to New York City. By the way, they also spend 1 million at Carnegie Hall. We've been a member of Carnegie Hall for years, and 1 million goes to Carnegie Hall. I saw that the other day when I was there. I was going, they're a major donor to Carnegie Hall. It's like one of the wealthiest groups of people in the world, and our taxpayer dollars are going to Carnegie Hall. It's certainly an outrage. And this just shows you where 3.6 million to Michelle Obama Trail in Georgia. Now, I've gone a lot of trails in Georgia. I used to live in Atlanta. But why did they make it Michelle Obama? Probably to get some votes. And that was it. But if you want to build a trail in Georgia, go ahead, Georgia. You build the trail, not the people in North Carolina. I wouldn't build a trail in Georgia. Forget it. Gets worse. 3 million Gandhi Museum in Texas. Who needs a Gandhi Museum in Texas? What is this all about? What it shows, David, is just the absolute disgusting corruption of Washington, D.C. How about this? 750,000 transgender in Los Angeles. I don't care. I would not. I'm sorry. Rick lives in. Look, if you want to spend it, Rick, go ahead. I'm not doing it. There's over 15 billion in pork, according to the New York Times. And by the way, I'm just the tip of the iceberg. If you go through the budget, it is in the billions and billions of dollars, not just this, but climate change. And I haven't got to the corporate welfare yet, but the corporate welfare is staggering. How about, let's see, here we go, more. 15 billion in pork, and then we have 700 billion to energy industry, corporate welfare, called the Inflation Reduction Act. There is no inflation being reduced, David. It is increasing inflation. It's a bad agenda. It's called a woke agenda. Billions in climate change going out the door. By the way, if you're an investor, invest in climate change garbage, because they're going to just drop billions of dollars that way. It's a disgusting budget, and it is what it is. Between the corporate welfare and the individual welfare, this thing should be.
Hey, Nick, quick question for you and everything. And I don't know what, because you were a comptroller general, Dave, and everything, but I'm imagining, and I don't know this for a fact, that some of that money for some of those arts organizations, because as I told you before, the Hayti Heritage Center gets federal money, as do some of the other organizations here, including the Durham Arts Council and the Carolina Theater and a number of others. They get money, and they get them sometimes from arts parts of the government, because if I'm hearing you correctly, you would not have a National Endowment of the Arts, which is actually a federal agency, and all along those lines, you would not have the Interior Department, which is actually a thing that funds some of the state parks, and all along those lines, because definitely even the Eno River Association gets some federal money and everything, and we're depending just strictly on the private citizens. A lot of times the private citizens are not paying for that and everything. So the
state can fund it. Let the state fund it. But it's
the
not
state funds
it's
some of
not
it,
a federal government idea to fund the
funded
Hayti
as
Center
well. So
or the Carolina Theater. That's a state and local issue. It's not a federal issue. It's wrong. I didn't even know they were sucking the government. And let me tell you something. As a chess player, I really disagree with the National Endowment for the Arts. They never fund chess. They hate chess because it's intellectual. I hate them. Get rid of the National Endowment for the Arts.
So you want to get rid of that? And a lot of these organizations are funded by.
If they're funded by the government. Look, if they take state money, remember states are required to balance their budget every year. Take state money, no problem. Take city money, no problem. Take federal government
They
money,
take
real
they take all
problem.
three. They take state,
No,
city, and federal, because
no.
definitely
Well,
a lot of that
forget the federal
is
government. We're broke.
unrealistic and everything. Because a lot of times
We're
you have to
broke,
get federal
realistic.
money in order to just survive and in order to maintain.
Nope.
And a number of the federal agencies
Too
actually
bad.
have grants and things that they are awarding, sometimes in the tune
I
of
know
millions
it's wrong.
and billions
It's wrong now.
and
It's
everything.
wrong.
So, like I said, so you would just eliminate all of this. You would eliminate
I
all of
would eliminate it
federal
all. Goodbye.
agencies and everything that actually
Yep,
support
you
the
get
arts.
to
If
take,
I'm
you
hearing
get to
you
take
correctly,
from the.
I think
you
that
get
that
to
is
take
wrong
from the
on your part.
state, local, take from the state, local, but the federal government, no. Yeah, Rick.
So, I mean, pork is nothing new. Those of us who remember the 60s remember Senator William Proxmire's Golden Fleece Awards. Once a week, he'd look through the budget and spotlight a bit of spending that he thought, and most people would agree, was ridiculous. But pork serves a function. It's like every congressperson is like a little head of a mafia family, and they want a taste. So you give them a little money for a project, and then they can go back home to their constituents and say, hey, look at this money that I'm bringing to our state and your community. And like you mentioned, the 1.2 million for a LGBTQ center in New York, 1.2 million out of a budget of 1.2 trillion is 1/1,000,000th of the budget. For every dollar in the budget, that's 1/10,000th of a penny to the center. And yeah, it's not necessary, but I think it's probably hard to do the business of Congress without throwing some scraps to the people doing the legislation.
Yeah, but see that is that mentality, otherwise called the lunatic left, has gotten us in this problem to begin with. And so the thing is that mentality has to go. And to go, you just get rid of the
not just the
LGBTQ.
lunatic left.
And look, the other thing I have against it is
I just looked up
hey,
Clinton's budget. No,
So
why didn't they give
hold
1.2
on a
million to
second.
the chess center in New York City? Why
No,
did they
there
give
is a
it to
chess center.
Manhattan
Hold on a
Chess
second. There is a chess center because it's actually one of the leading chess
It's
centers.
in
They do
the Marshall
concerts. There's
Center.
a chess center in,
I know.
I believe it's in Memphis or St. Louis. There's a chess center in St. Louis that I know
It's
for a fact
privately
gets
funded.
federal.
I'm
It
totally
gets, no, it's
familiar
not.
with it.
No, it is not. It is not
Yeah, it is.
100%
Rick
privately
Stankley
funded.
funded.
It gets federal money. I know this for
And
a
if
fact.
he is, it's wrong. It's wrong now, and it's wrong 10 years from
No,
now.
it gets
And
federal
the
money.
reason why we're in
Federal
this problem, the reason why we're in this financial problem is this attitude. Well, this is the way we always do it. I used to hear my HOA people say that. Well, this is the way we always do it. Look, the way you always do it doesn't work. It's immoral. It's wrong to have our grandchildren, great grandchildren eating peanut butter sandwiches because they're funding an LGBTQ center in New York City, and they're not even funding it. We're just paying interest on a debt because it was real small. Everything's real small.
It's not
Then it
just
adds
the
up to a lot.
Democrats. It's not just the Democrats.
No,
This is
Oh, yeah,
this election.
this is a
is not-
bipartisan stupidity. I agree with you on that, Rick.
Okay,
You know,
and
Hold
this
on, hold on,
election
hold on a
is
second.
two
Hold on a
major
second. Hold on a
candidates.
second. There is a mountain that is in the part of the world that's actually we can go to the West Coast and everything. And I know for a fact that they get federal money. So if I hear you correctly, and
Cut 'em
everything,
off.
you will not fund the Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore
No.
is federally funded.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If Mount Rushmore wants to be funded, they can use user fees. User fees work. You go, you pay the fee, you go watch Mount Rushmore. But the
So you're
U.S.
not going to
government
fund
should
Mount
not be
Rushmore. You're
spending
not going to
money
fund
to
the
Mount
Grand
Rushmore. No
Canyon.
way.
You're not going to fund the Ronald
No
Reagan
way.
Center. To speak
Nope.
to Rick's point,
I would
there are
never fund the
Republican
Ronald
senators
Reagan
as
Center.
well.
Are you bloody
you-
kidding me?
Hold on.
Never.
I'm back. My computer did go down and came
Yeah,
back.
go ahead.
I think we have to have a philosophical framework here. All right. First, there's a lot of things in the budget that have nothing to do with federal or national issues. And if they don't have anything to do with federal or national issues, cut them out. We
Right.
should not be funding state and local issues, period. They should be able to do it. Secondly, there are a lot of things that, as you talk about, Nick, where there are opportunities for user fees, where
Yeah.
you end up generating revenue in order to pay for it. However, I would respectfully suggest that Mount Rushmore, where I've been, is a national park. That is something of national significance. The federal government might end up spending money on that, but they ought to try to minimize the amount of money that they have to spend on it by thinking about having user fees or whatever. But most of the examples that you gave have nothing to do with the federal government. and therefore are either state and or local initiatives or special interest initiatives. It's one thing if we're running a surplus. It's one thing if we have reasonable debt to GDP levels, but that's not the case. And just because this is the way they've always done it, well, we used to be in a lot better shape than we are now, and we're getting worse with the passage of time. So it's just another example of how we got to do things differently. We
I get
can't.
what you're saying, Dave, but I mean, would you fund Cape Hatteras? Cape Hatteras is off the coast of North Carolina, and I know that is considered a national interest, and it does get federal money. So would you fund Cape Hatteras as a federal thing and everything? Because that is considered a national lighthouse that has got national recognition. And like I said before, the Eno River Association, which is the state park, it is a state park, but state parks are sometimes needing to get the support of federal money as well. And the same with the recently built Dick's Park that was a former mental health facility that is in Raleigh, North Carolina. But I know that they get both federal and state money.
The answer is, if it's a state park, it should not get federal money, period. If it's a state park.
This
If
election is not
a national park. If it's a national park, that's different, okay? But I come back to what Nick said. We ought to be trying to have user fees. By the way, you're muted, Nick. We ought to try to have user fees in order to minimize the amount of subsidy that's necessary.
I'm just agreeing with you, Dave. There should
Okay.
be user fees. And I notice when I'm trying to buy some property in Spain, so I have a house in Europe so I can bebop over Europe. They have a very interesting tax system over there. If you buy a piece of property over there, they hit you with a 10% upfront tax. And I was going, that's actually good for the Spanish government. We don't have anything like that because we don't have a system, a tax system that actually works for the people. I did see the tax increases and they're going to affect me, but that's not the reason I'm going to Europe. But anyway, the thing is, they affect me negatively. But what really affects me negatively, it's not like the money's going to be used to reduce the national debt or reduce our deficit. It's going to be frittered away on all these incredibly stupid ideas.
No, hold on a second. I gotta ask Dave this question because it was asked to me.
Rick, Mark, let's let Rick jump in. He's had his hand up.
Rick.
So this upcoming election really isn't about reducing the deficit because both major candidates have added trillions to the deficit and haven't made any kind of noise about balancing the budget. But it is about it would be nice to get people in the habit of electing sane politicians, because sane politicians are the ones who can look at the budget, listen to reason, and change their minds and change their focus. In North Carolina, you've got this lunatic running for governor Mark Robinson, and leading in the polls right now. This is a guy who has said that certain people he doesn't like are actually lizards wearing human skin. We've got to get the electorate out of the habit of electing crazy people because crazy people don't get anything done.
Well, let me remind you that while it is pretty evident that Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee, absent some unexpected catastrophic event, it is pretty evident that Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee, absent some unexpected catastrophic event. The fact is the people don't want either one. And therefore, stay tuned because within the next 2 weeks, I expect that No Labels is going to decide whether or not it's going to offer a third option unity ticket. And I'm very much involved in that. And if they do, I can assure you that 3 of the top issues that will be focused on are the economy, inflation, and fiscal responsibility will be numero uno. Number 2, border security and immigration reform, number 2. And number 3, America's place in the world, which deals with diplomatic and military capabilities. And number 4 will end up being rule of law and equal justice under the law, including fighting crime in the country, in particular in major urban areas. Unlike the Democrats and the Republicans who are giving us people we don't want, and who are not running on an issue-oriented, solutions-based campaign, this option would do that. It would,
Dave, really quickly, most organizations, and that's where I was going with my question and everything, because like I said, I have this conversation with several of my coworkers, because as y'all know, I work for Pod TV, but also work for various arts organizations, either as a board member in the past or currently working with them now and everything. And this is for you as a no labels person. Most arts organizations around the country depend on local, state, and federal money. So that is very much true. I don't care what the organization is. I'm part of NPN. It's called the National Performance Network. And most of those organizations, whether they're in New York or whether they're in Atlanta or Durham, North Carolina, or wherever, they depend on all three. So what would your answer be to folks that want to maintain these organizations if you're not going to give them federal aid? Because that's what my coworker, my boss, actually asked me when I brought this conversation up, Nick, because I brought it up to her in the past.
Yeah.
She was like, ask them how they would have us funded.
well, the answer is depends upon how material the funding is. I mean, I don't know how much of it comes from the federal government. I don't know how much of it comes from state. I don't know how much of it comes from local. I don't know how much of it comes from, foundations and individuals directly. I mean, I just don't know. I will tell you this. The government's grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, and has got to restructure. And when it restructures, one of the fundamental questions it's going to have to ask is this something that is of national significance? If it's something that's of national significance, then the federal government ought to consider being involved with it.
And that's what I'm saying. The HTAS, hold on a second. The HTAS Center is a nationally recognized organization. We're actually recognized as a national historical site. So in that case, it is a national historical.
Right, let me finish. Is this something that is one of the responsibilities that the founders envisioned that should be the responsibility of the federal government? Because keep in mind, under the Constitution, it says that if it is not provided to the federal government, then it's a responsibility of the states and the people. So my only point is this: you should not assume that the status quo is sustainable. It's not. Okay. And when the government ends up having to finally make the tough choices, it's going to have a series of principles and criteria to be able to make those choices in a reasonable, non-discriminatory fashion. So people, you need to think about what's going to happen if funding from the federal government gets reduced significantly. Now, if you're saying it's somehow nationally recognized,
it is.
Okay, well, I don't know all the details on that. Maybe it has national significance. I don't know. I can't comment on that. Rick?
Yeah, let's say that you run a no labels candidate for president running on these issues. Are you hoping that among the effects of this, that it'll get the Biden and Trump to talk about these issues and add like provisions to their not that Trump really has a platform, but they would make promises about addressing the issues that on the budget?
The answer is, if we run a ticket, we're running a ticket to win. At the same point in time, we're running a ticket that would focus on issues and results. And therefore, we would expect that it would have an impact on both the Democratic and Republican candidates, just as Ross Perot had a major impact on Bill Clinton when he got elected president, who made fiscal responsibility a much higher priority than otherwise it would have been. The difference is Ross Perot, who was a friend of mine, didn't want to be president. He wanted to affect the national agenda, and he did. But in our case, the situation is so dire. The percentage of people that don't want Biden or Trump, the percentage of people who believe the country's headed in the wrong direction, the percentage of people who believe that the future for their kids and grandkids is not going to be as good as theirs. We've never had this before. The percentage of people who are politically unaffiliated, deemed to be independents like myself, has never been as high as now. So there's a unique opportunity to try to do something now that has the chance to be successful and win. But if it is not successful and does not win, does have the chance to affect the national agenda, which clearly needs to be.
So one possible outcome of a no labels candidate is, say your candidate wins 7 or 8 states, enough electoral votes that neither Trump nor Biden gets a majority of the votes, and then the choice for president goes to the House of Representatives.
Yes, I'm familiar with that. That's right. All right, but then you got to determine what's the result of the electoral vote. Okay, the Democrats aren't going to vote for the Republican. Okay, the Republicans aren't going to vote for the Democrat. Okay, if our candidate comes in second place, we'll win.
You think you can get enough votes in the House of Representatives to get
under the scenario, if our candidate comes in second place in the Electoral College, all right, I think we can win in the House. That's not the strategy, all right? But you do have to think about what would happen. Why? Because the Democrats won't vote for the Republicans, and the Republicans won't vote for the Democrats.
However, there are more each state gets 2 votes, I believe, or one vote, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Each state gets 1 vote, so and so California gets the same vote as Rhode Island.
Right, but so there are, I think, slightly more states that would vote Republican.
There are more red states, but the other thing is you're likely to have a Democrat House, and it's the new House that would be voted, not the old House.
Hey, Dave, along those same lines and everything, because there was this notion of boll weevil Democrats, which some people would consider to be very much Republican oriented, and some people would say that the MAGA Republicans can be extremists as well. So I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you for the most part that most Democrats won't vote for most Republicans, and most Republicans won't vote for most Democrats. But you notice I did use the term most, because I do think that there are some that would vote across the aisles and all along those lines. So would that impact your notion as well? Because I do think there's some Democrats that are leaning more Republican, just like there's some Republicans that are leaning more Democrat. We see that even with the way that some people are literally quitting their respective parties.
Well, let me give you a bottom line number. Our latest data says there are 80 million registered voters that would seriously consider voting for a third option unity ticket rather than Biden or Trump. 80 million. In addition to that, 69% of voters don't want Biden and 62% don't want Trump. And as you know, in all but 2 states in the United States, all you have to do is win a plurality of votes in the state in order to get all the electoral votes. For that state. The 2 exceptions are Nebraska and Maine, which have, frankly, very few electoral votes. So, I mean, run the math. I mean, but it depends, obviously, on who the ticket is. I mean, right. This is hypothetical, right? And my argument all along is the first thing you have to make sure of if we're going to run a ticket is the person at the top has got to be qualified to be president of the United States. If they're not qualified to be president of the United States, we should not run a ticket. So and I think there's a significant majority of the people involved in No Labels would agree with that. You just don't want to have some pretty person who's a good speaker who's got courage. There's plenty of those around. You need to have somebody who's qualified to be president of the United States, who's got the courage to run, and who's committed to the common sense agenda, which is on No Labels website at www.nolabels.org. Nick, I'll turn it back to you, my friend.
Well, I'm looking forward to that particular individual because it seems to me the elections are very personality driven. So the thing is, you need somebody who has personality who's well known nationally, who can actually deliver, so that I don't have to throw my vote away, as I'm very discouraged with both parties in terms of who their nominee is.
But hold on for a second, okay? Ross Perot was not a well-known personality before he ran. He might have been well-known in the business community, but he was not well-known by the American people. And in June of 1992, he was winning the race for president. And then he dropped out because of the issues associated with his daughter's wedding or whatever. He came back in primarily, not to win, but he came back in order to be part of the national debates to affect the national agenda, which we talked about before, which he did. And so, our view is that there's such dissatisfaction with the 2 candidates that are being offered by the major parties that there's such dissatisfaction with regard to the current state of the country and the future direction of the country. There's so much dissatisfaction with the Congress and with the executive branch right now, that our person, if qualified and if a good communicator, all right, and if younger than the other two people, don't have to be young, but younger than the other two people, that they will become known very quickly.
Right.
So you're not talking to Dwayne Johnson. You're not going to run the Rock for president.
Not the Rock, baby.
No. I don't
Don't run the rock.
It's not running the Rock.
But how would they get on the ballot? I mean, isn't it?
We're already on in 19 states, Steve,
Okay.
and we've made significant progress in the other states. And
Is it a
there's
setback? I forgot to. We're sorry about Joe Lieberman. I knew you knew
no,
him.
he was a great man.
Yeah,
he
I'm
was-
sorry for your loss. Is that a setback for the new labels?
Sure
or
it is. Sure it is. He was one of our original chairs. He's co-chair, and there's no question about it. But I think Joe would want us to go if we have a qualified candidate. All right, he would want us to go given the circumstances. And so I'm involved in this, and I can't talk, with regard to details, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to come up with somebody who's qualified. They then have to pick a running mate who's also qualified. They can't be of the same political affiliation, and they have to run an issue-oriented, solutions-based campaign that's consistent with the common sense agenda, which, by the way, gets 70 to 80% support among registered voters. So let me tell you, this will shake things up big time. And I think Kennedy right now is anywhere from 12% to 20% in the polls, depending what you go by. But that's because he's the only other alternative other than Jill Stein and West. Okay, they're going to get 2%, whatever, mainly out of Biden. But I think if you have a real viable option other than Kennedy, because I think Kennedy's agenda is not in the mainstream, and his vice presidential candidate, quite frankly, is not qualified to be president in any way, shape, or form, then I think we'll take a lot of his support and support from both Trump and Biden.
So it's only 7 months until the election. That seems
right.
like a short amount of time.
Well, at this point in time, in 1992, Perot wasn't on any ballots. We're on 19 and counting. And for a number of the states, you can't even get on the state ballot until you have the candidates. You have to actually have the candidates.
Are you concerned at all? Are you concerned at all about those that have publicly turned down the no labels? Because I know that Christie did. I think Manchin did. There have been a couple.
First, you got to assume that they were offered it. I mean, don't believe everything you read. Okay, there's a lot of people that have been considered. Okay, but that doesn't mean they offered it. Okay. The other thing is I sent in about 25 to 30 names, Republicans, Democrats, unaffiliated, that I felt we should consider either for the number one or number two spot. Now, a number of those people have been considered. That doesn't mean they've been offered anything, but a lot of the people, frankly, they don't want to leave their party. Right. Because the bottom line is, if you take the no labels option, you are forever a pariah in your party. You are an independent forever. You will never gain traction in that party again. And you're obviously not going to get traction in the other party, right? So this is basically a career decision to say, look, I love my country more than my party. I think this is a unique opportunity, and I'm willing to forego my labels, like no labels, and do it for the country, and do it for my kids, and do it for my grandkids, and let the chips fall where they may. I mean, that's
Dave, I was laughing at you a little bit because I was thinking about a couple of people like Tulsi Gabbard and a couple of others that have literally gone from party to party and seem to get traction in both parties. So I think that there are some exceptions to the rule. And I'm not saying that
there are always exceptions to the rules. And by the way, Tulsi is one of many people that was on my list, although she's probably a better potential candidate for vice president than the president. So. Yeah. I mean, I think it's very important that the presidential candidate have chief executive experience, either in the public, private, and or not-for-profit sector. I think that's critically important, and among other things, but that's kind of foundational. And Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson does not have that.
I would come back
a great actor. He went to the University of Miami, so I have to give.
By the way,
University of Miami, but
neither does
he's not
Michelle
a
Obama.
presidential guy.
All right, so
No, and Michelle Obama has said dozens of times she hates politics.
and if I
Yeah,
was,
politics, she's not gonna
I
get
wouldn't
involved.
be either. Okay, you know.
No.
And
Yeah.
so not Oprah either. So I thought
Well, he does have her own company, but it's not
yeah,
exactly.
I follow an online bookmaker, and I've been making a lot of bets on who's going to win the presidency. But like 4 days ago, this bookmaker quit taking bets on who's going to win, and I wonder if they're just holding back. Because a bookie doesn't want to take bets if they can't calculate the odds of what they think. And I wonder if what you're doing has already shaken up the situation so much that they're just going to wait and see before they start taking bets again.
If I was them, I would.
makes sense to me
Yeah.
and everything.
For the record, I don't bet with bookies, but I hear you.
But if
I'm
you were,
not talking about $2 at a time. No, like
Hopefully, they're a legal bookie.
well, there's a whole legal bookies here in North Carolina. I want to come back to the budget really quickly because I know it's one of Nick's favorite topics and everything, and I want to get away
Yes.
from the arts and all along those lines. But a number of the candidates, including Biden and others, have talked about the need to fund research, and I do have friends in that space as well. So I just wonder, from a budgetary standpoint, can we afford to have a cancer research or some of these other things, AIDS research, and a couple of other things that are impacting our health and everything? And where would no labels stand on that? Because I do know that there was this whole notion of the cancer moonshot, I think is what it was called, or something along those lines. But I just wanted your take on scientific research and whether that's something that should get funded.
Yeah, I think the federal government has a role with regard to basic research, not applied research. In addition, there's two ways the federal government gets involved in research. One is direct spending, in many cases, grants to universities and or other entities that are conducting the research. In some cases, to federal agencies, the National Institute of Health or whatever, who's doing work. But the second way that the federal government provides subsidies is through the tax code. There are significant tax benefits to research and development. But I think on that, as part of comprehensive tax reform, you need to take a hard look and differentiate between basic research and applied research. And the federal government ought to be focusing on supporting basic research, not applied research.
Just
So,
along those
but
lines.
It screws to them on research, Mark, also. In other words, look, if the state wants to fund research, remember the states can't file bankruptcy under Chapter 9. Municipal corporations can, but states can't. So they're forced to balance their budget. In Europe, if you're part of the European Union, the reason Spain, Italy, and Greece had to get their act together, they wouldn't allow them unless you had your GDP not more than 100% debt to GDP ratio. The United States has no fiscal controls whatsoever. And if you have to eliminate research, eliminate NASA, get rid of it. Now, if the states want to pick up the research, I don't have any problem with it. But the federal government, who is beyond broke, needs to get out of the research business. And in fact, most of the innovation is done by private industry anyway. So why fund all this crazy research out there by professors? It's absolutely ridiculous. Just pull their research funding.
But Nick, along
yeah.
those same lines, and I did see Rick's hand and everything, but along those same lines, and I'm gonna come back to art because my mom was involved
pull
in
that
that
too,
space
you
for a
already know
while and everything. Most of those arts organizations are grant funded, even to y'all's point and everything. And those grants are funded
giveaways.
over a time frame. So most of them are given those grants. Like we just completed a grant, Ed, which was a federal grant. It was at Hayti, but it was a 5-year grant. That 5-year grant is now ended. So we did have that 5-year grant, but there are usually grants that are for a limited amount of time and everything. So I would think that wouldn't necessarily be as bad, Dave, but you can tell me if I'm wrong and everything, because a lot of the grants are that are limited.
Let the state pick it up. Yeah, Rick.
The Biden administration just established a Department of AI. So when you're vetting your no labels candidates, are you, among the things you're looking at, are you looking at their how well versed they are in technology?
The Department of AI, when did it happen?
Kamala Harris announced that, I don't know if it's a full-on the full-on department to make sure that that AI is used
last thing-
responsibly. Just
the last
It's
thing we-
more government
The
spending.
last thing
It's
we
a waste
need
of money.
is more government departments.
Yeah.
We ought to be.
all right. So I probably misspoke. It's probably not a full department. I'll look it up while we're
I don't think it's
talking.
a full department.
Look it up, because that's one of the dumbest things I've heard lately.
And they are spending
Vice
money
President,
on,
I'm not surprised.
on that too. They're spending there's so much waste, fraud, and abuse. It's just incredible in this budget. Not only that, there's increases everywhere, and there should be decreases in the federal government budget, not increases. You don't want to fund all these idiotic government agencies at the rate we've been doing. What we need to do is cut them. And I think that the cut is around 9% per year for 4 years, and then you'll actually balance the budget, David. Seriously, it's not a big cut, and there's so much fat in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
I mean, it is fatter than the obesity problem in the United States of America that you can easily cut 9 or 10%.
All right, so it's
all the
not
government
a
agencies. And they'll still
it's
own
not
them.
a full-on department. It seems to be an executive order
Yeah, that was
on-
a good order. It wasn't
from-
made.
That's worth
from last year, from November, on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of AI. And then it lists just a bunch of guidelines to make
It's,
sure.
it's just more bureaucracy. I have to deal with this all the time as an attorney, Rick. It is insane, more bureaucracy that goes out there. They're spending money on stuff they don't even understand, Rick.
Rick,
They don't
Rick,
understand how so they're going to create an agency to figure out how they're going to
All
understand.
right,
something
okay,
they
so
don't understand.
okay, but
It's
like
just more
like
worthless
say-
government garbage.
Look at Chuck Grassley, who's this ancient senator. I don't think Chuck Grassley is well versed in AI. Don't you want
No.
it's McKinsey says that AI may double the world's GDP in the next 30 years.
Right.
So you
Private
do
industry.
want people who have a clue about this stuff. And
Well,
I
that goes without saying. Can I ask you a question? Is
Yeah.
Kamala Harris in charge of this?
don't know. I don't know. She just
don't
made
think
a
she's in
statement.
Failed at everything she's been put in charge of. So that does not give me a lot of comfort.
I don't think
Yeah.
she's in charge. I just think she made remarks.
Okay, well, you're right that you're right. You need to have competent people focusing on this because the stakes are so high. That goes without saying. But you don't need a new department to do it.
All right. Well, I misspoke. It's not a new department. It was an executive order.
Steve, you look concerned, buddy.
I'm just concerned about I'm just everything you're saying is just making me think that we continue to have this problem of the deficit, and it just concerns me that we just keep having threatening a government shutdown, continue to put stop the bleeding, keep going, and then just run more and more deficit. So I think inevitably it's just going to hurt our economy. But there's a mentality in America that we can just keep doing this. That's why I'm very serious when I have this conversation. And we just
Yeah,
passed.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they could have balanced the budget. There's so much fat in this budget, they could easily have balanced it, but they have no interest in it. They have no oversight. They're not part of the EU that require you can only have 100% of debt to GDP. They're not a state. And most states balance their budget because they have to, because they can't file bankruptcy. Instead, they're municipalities like Vallejo, California, that file bankruptcy, Detroit, Michigan, that file bankruptcy because they have no fiscal controls at all at the U.S. level. And this is and they have a mentality that we can spend money on anything to buy votes. And it just keeps going on.
But see, that's part of
It ain't
the
happening.
that's part of the
What?
modern monetary theory, which was failed and flawed, which said that you can run deficits and accumulate debt without limit as long as you can borrow in your own reserve currency, unless and until you have excess inflation. Well, guess what? It's contrary to long established economic theory. It's contrary to history. It's based on a flawed comparison to Japan, which is fundamentally different than us in many ways.
Right.
It resulted in excess inflation. All right. And compounded our problems. And so that's got to be thrown in the dustpan of history. All right.
Right.
But I come back to say, dustbin of history. But I come back to say, until you get a president, Republican, Democrat, Independent, I don't care, until you get a president who makes this a priority, who's willing to tell the truth, who's willing to make tough choices, until you get a statutory fiscal commission that will engage the people, solicit input, make recommendations for an up or down vote, until you get a constitutional amendment that binds current and future Congresses with regard to the size of government and the level of debt to GDP, you're not going to solve the problem. So that's what I'm focused on. I'm focused on those three things. And by the way, Nick, I thought it was 60% of debt to GDP for the Eurozone.
Well, it might, but Greece, Italy,
more
and Spain were all over 100.
Oh yeah, they were over, so they've got to be.
Yeah, and so they
down.
implemented policies, including this. If you buy real estate, you pay 10% up front
Yeah.
to reduce their debt. They also had Golden Visa. They've done a lot of things to reduce their debt in their countries, but the United States government has done nothing. Now,
Right.
when I did read the budget, I did see they had over $1 trillion increase in taxes. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
With $1 trillion increase in taxes, all they had to do is reduce their spending $700 billion, and they could have balanced the budget. But Joe, in his infinite brain wisdom, couldn't do that. Increase the taxes by $1 trillion, reduce the deficit by decreasing the expenditures $700 billion, and submit for the first time a balanced budget. And Joe would get my vote. But guess what? He can't do it. He doesn't get my vote. Next.
If Biden or Trump is reelected, they are going to be a lame duck. They can't run again.
That's right.
So they could make unpopular decisions that
Yeah.
they could decide to try to balance the budget, even though it would piss off a lot of interests, because they wouldn't have to care about running for president again.
That's a good point. I mean, maybe that's the only hope for America is maybe they could actually, either one of them, get a few things done, particularly immigration reform, get something done on the border.
Well,
balance
Biden
the
already
budget.
moved on immigration reform. It took him 3 years, but he moved further towards the Republicans than any Democrat. At least this is what I read, than any president before.
But playing devil's advocate, some people say he waited too long and that he should have done it earlier than waiting until
He did, and he didn't move enough, and he waited too long. But understand this: you are correct, Rick, that they will be lame ducks, and therefore, in theory, they don't have to worry about re-election. But you forget that we have a House and a Senate, and the entire House gets elected every 2 years, and a third of the Senate gets elected every 2 years, and most of those people are career politicians, and ultimately they have to vote on whatever the president proposes. As we know, under the Constitution, the president proposes, the Congress disposes. And this latest budget that the president proposed is dead on arrival. All right. And I'm afraid the way that we're dealing, the way things are in Washington right now, the margins are the closest they've ever been in both houses. And the degree of partisanship and the ideological divide is as great as it's ever been. And yet we have an election coming up, which means that we're not likely to see much get done this year. And every 4 years, people say this is the most important, presidential election in our lifetime. I actually think that's true this time. I actually think that's true.
But we've been evenly divided forever. The last president to get more than 53% of the popular vote was George Bush the first in 1988. Got a little more than 50.
Yeah.
Since then,
Yeah, I'm not talking about the presidency. I'm talking about the House and the Senate. The margins in the House and the Senate are the closest they've ever been, and
which leads to nothing getting done.
And the difference between being in the majority and minority is huge, especially in the House, where the minority has zero rights. In the Senate, you've got the filibuster, unless it's on budget reconciliation. And so you got to have 60 votes. And if you don't have a 60 vote margin for control, then the minority does have some rights. And every senator has certain rights, as we found out with Tommy Tuberville, who was holding up, confirmation of military promotions. Every senator has power. Sometimes they use it rightly, and sometimes they use it wrongly.
Hey Jay, just really quickly, how would you
Absolutely.
divide the budget when it comes to another part of the divide? Because we can talk about the race divide, we can talk about other divides, including the immigrations, but there is no doubt, you can even look at North Carolina, that there is a divide between urban, rural, and suburban. And there are some people, including those examples that Nick gave earlier, that would say that those are mostly urban examples and that their rural areas and the suburban areas are not getting enough of that federal money, and they might want some more aid versus less aid. So I just wondering, how would you deal with that as a no labels candidate? Because I know a number of people, having farmers in my family, that are frustrated by the lack of federal support that they are getting. So how would you deal with that divide in when it comes to demographics, that type of demographics?
Well, you have to first understand what's the role of the federal government. What are you trying to achieve? How do you measure success? What are the tools that you have to try to achieve those objectives and outcomes? Unfortunately, the federal government tends to focus more on throwing money at problems, whether or not the systems work at all. And so I think, once you determine that, then, equity is a key issue. All right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not equality, equity. And to the extent that there are needs in rural areas that aren't being met, and it's an issue of national concern, then I think the federal government ought to adjust it to do that. If you look at a map of the United States, and if you look at red versus blue, you'll see that a vast majority of the rural areas are red, and a vast majority of the urban areas are blue. And some of the problems are more acute, like, for example, healthcare access to healthcare. Much bigger problem in rural areas than it is urban areas. Violent crime, much bigger problem in urban areas than it is rural areas. All right. But again, you have to have a framework of what's federal, what are we trying to achieve, how do we measure success, how can we allocate our resources and authorities to achieve as much as we can with what we have. And there's a limit. There's a limit.
You can't make decisions on this stuff without clear understanding, and there's just a lack of clarity, and the news does not help people understand. I tried to look up. There's a thing that libs like to say, which is that the red states get more back from the federal government than they contribute. But you try looking that up, and there are so many numbers and different ways of cutting the statistics that there's no clarity.
It's been great seeing you. I have to leave, David. Always great to see you. Look forward to seeing you next week. Keep up the good work. And we want to bring you to North Carolina to talk about no labels. So I'm going to shoot you an email. That'd be nice to do an event down here.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll be able to get another candidate on board. I'm not very confident about how this country is being managed, but I think you're right, David. Vast majority of Americans are. If you look at how this place is being managed, horrible. The agenda also had billions and billions of dollars going to climate change issues.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of them are just unproven. All he's doing is writing checks to anybody who says, "I got a solution for climate change. Here comes some money." I mean, it's just. It's almost outrageous, but unfortunately, it's sending us right down the tubes. In the meantime, we're going to send us off the air because we're at the hour. But we want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, Rick Rosner, member of the Mega Society, not MAGA Society. It's a different society. And Mark Lee, producer at Pod TV. And we'll see you next time.
And Mark, take care. Thanks.
Honorable David M. Walker.
Take care, guys. Be good.
Bye-bye.